Imagine being a child, locked in a room, high on LSD, while the woman you call mother tells you she's God. That sounds like the stuff of horror movies, but it was real. And it didn't happen in some hidden commune. It happened in suburbs, hospitals, and schools, with doctors and lawyers helping it along. How did this cult fool everyone? And how did it finally come crashing down? This is the story of Anne Hamilton-Byrne and the family, a cult built with the help of psychiatrists who should have stopped it, children who grew up believing they were siblings when they weren't, and one teenage girl whose punishment became the cult's undoing. And by the end, you'll see why the family is remembered as Australia's most dangerous cult. Every cult begins with a person, not a monster, not a myth, just a person. For the family, that person was Evelyn Grace Victoria Edwards, born in Melbourne, 1921. Poverty, institutions, chaos. By adulthood, people described her as unstable, violent, even setting her own hair on fire in public. To most, that screams, get help. But in the 1950s and 60s, when people were desperate for meaning, those same outbursts looked like something else. Not symptoms, signs, not madness, revelation. And Evelyn figured that out. She reinvented herself as Anne Hamilton-Byrne. The name sounded upper class, almost aristocratic. She built the image: too tall blonde hair, expensive dresses, diamonds. Survivors would later say she carried herself with the airs of the Queen of England. But she wasn't selling fashion. She was selling belonging. She became a yoga teacher for Melbourne's wealthy suburban mothers, women who had money, but no meaning. And Anne hinted she had answers. Her classes weren't about exercise. They were about mystery. She claimed she'd been chosen, a living link between humanity and the divine. Some even believed she was Jesus Christ, reborn in female form. Here's the sinister part. Her volatility didn't scare people. It made them believe more. A psychiatrist might call it delusion. Her followers, prophecy. That was Anne's genius. To turn chaos into charisma, instability into authority, a yoga class into the seed of a cult. But charisma only gets you so far. To be worshipped as a living god, she needed something much stronger than glamour. She needed credibility, and she was about to find it in a man whose reputation should have destroyed her claims, but instead made them unstoppable. In 1962, Anne met Dr. Rainer Johnson. On paper, he was everything she wasn't. Oxford, educated physicist, respected scholar, former master of Queen's College at the University of Melbourne. The kind of man you'd expect to laugh in the face of mysticism. But Johnson had a weakness. He was obsessed with the supernatural. And when he met Anne, the glamorous yoga teacher with queenly poise, that obsession snapped into belief. He declared her the reincarnation of Jesus Christ. And if that sounds unthinkable, what came next was even stranger. Johnson claimed that he was John the Baptist, reborn to prepare the way for her. Think about what that did. Suddenly, Anne wasn't just a teacher making wild claims. She had validation from a respected academic. His reputation gave her delusions, the weight of authority. If you were on the fence wondering if she was unstable, or Divine Johnson's endorsement tipped the scales. And once he fell, others followed. At first, it was small spiritual circles in his home. But soon, the Great White Brotherhood, later called the Family, was born. And here's what set them apart. It wasn't drifters. or the desperate filling the ranks. It was professionals, doctors, psychiatrists, lawyers, people with power, money, and credibility. Why would the educated join a cult? Because they weren't searching for food or shelter. They were searching for meaning. And Anne sold it to them, wrapped in glamour and mysticism. But these weren't just followers. They were insiders. With lawyers, Anne could rewrite adoptions and hide property. With psychiatrists, she could legitimize drugging children. With doctors, she had access to the medications that would keep her empire under control. And then came her boldest move yet, taking over New Haven, a private psychiatric hospital. On the outside, it looked reputable. On the inside, it was Anne's laboratory. Children and adults alike were dosed with LSD under the guise of therapy. Hallucinations weren't mistakes. They were proof Anne was divine. This wasn't recruitment. This was infiltration. And once she had a hospital, doctors, and psychiatrists under her thumb, Anne turned her focus to her most disturbing project yet, creating children of her own. Between 1968 and 1975, Anne Hamilton-Byrne began her most disturbing project. She started collecting children. Some were the biological kids of cult members handed over as if they were offerings to a god, but others were stolen, illegal adoptions, paperwork forged by lawyers, rubber-stamped by doctors, identities erased. By the end, she had gathered 14, and she gave them all the same last name, Hamilton-Byrne. To those children, there was no before, no other family, no past to return to. They were told Anne was their biological mother. They were told they were siblings. They were told the outside world was a lie. And if you don't know who you are, the only truth left is the one you're given. Anne's truth was simple. I am your mother. I am your savior. I am your God. To outsiders, it looked perfect. Carefully staged home movies showed smiling kids in matching outfits, running through sunny gardens, laughing under their mother's watchful eye. Clips that looked like happiness. But those weren't memories. They were propaganda. On the inside, the matching clothes and bleached blonde hair weren't signs of unity. They were symbols of ownership, a reminder that individuality didn't exist. You didn't belong to yourself. You belonged to Anne. And ownership was only the beginning. Because once she had her children, she began reshaping them into her master race. The compound was called Kai Lama. The children knew it as Uptop. From the outside, it looked like paradise gardens, lake views, a picture of peace. But inside, it was a prison disguised as heaven. Every child wore the same uniform. Every head of hair was bleached the same bright blonde. Not children, not individuals. A project. Anne told them they were being prepared as her master race. Food was rationed so tightly. The children were always hungry. Beatings came without warning, delivered by loyal female enforcers known as the aunties. They weren't mothers. They weren't protectors. They were executioners of discipline. And here's the sinister part. Anne herself almost never raised a hand. She drifted in and out like a queen, offering smiles, gifts, gentle touches. The aunties did the damage, while Anne played the savior. That split twisted the children's reality. The people who hurt them were feared. The woman who orchestrated it all was loved. Psychologists call it traumatic bonding. Anne called it loyalty. But the worst wasn't the beatings. It was the pills. Doctors inside the cult prescribed flufenazine, diazepam, haloperidol, powerful sedatives. Not for treatment, for control. Children were drugged into silence, their wills chemically erased. And then came the initiations. When a child reached adolescence, they were locked in a dark room, dosed with LSD, and in the middle of the hallucinations, terrified, shaking, they were visited by Anne. "What you're seeing," she whispered, "proves I am God." Imagine being a teenager, your mind dissolving under acid, and the only authority figure you know tells you the glowing visions in your head confirm her divinity. That isn't faith. That's programming. Meanwhile, the outside world saw something else entirely. Home movies of golden-haired children playing in sunny gardens, smiling, laughing, singing. The truth? Those weren't memories. They were propaganda reels designed to hide the bruises, the hunger, the sedation. Uptop wasn't a home. It was a factory. Every haircut, every pill, every staged smile, designed to erase the child and replace them with Anne's creation. And for nearly 20 years, the system held. 14 children grew in silence, unseen, unheard, unknown. But even the strongest walls crack, and Anne's empire would begin to fall because of one girl, one act of defiance she thought was punishment, but became her undoing. For nearly 2 decades, Anne Hamilton-Byrne's grip seemed unbreakable. The children had no past, no identity outside of her, no voice beyond the one she allowed. But there was one child Anne could never fully silence: Sarah Hamilton-Byrne. From the beginning, Sarah questioned. She argued. She pushed back against the myth of Anne's divinity. And in Anne's world, doubt was heresy. By 1987, Sarah was 17, old enough to think, old enough to fight back, and Anne hated that. So she did something drastic. She cast Sarah out. It was meant to be the ultimate punishment, banishment from the only family she'd ever known. A sentence of isolation, a declaration, "You are nothing without me." But the punishment backfired, because outside Uptop's fences, Sarah did the one thing no child had ever dared. She spoke, first to a private investigator, then to the Victoria Police. Her words painted a nightmare: children stolen through fake adoptions, starved, beaten, sedated with heavy drugs, locked in dark rooms, and forced onto LSD trips, where visions were weaponized as proof of divinity. For investigators, it was the break they had been waiting for. Whispers of the family had circulated for years, but without proof, they always died in silence. Now, they had a witness, a survivor. Sarah's exile had turned into a rebellion, and soon, her voice would summon an army. August 14th, 1987. The hills around Lake Eildon were quiet, still, like nothing could touch them. Then sirens. Engines roared up the gravel drive. Doors slammed. Radios crackled. Boots hit the earth in unison. After years of whispers and dead ends, Victoria Police had come for Uptop. Inside the compound, the children froze. They weren't prepared for rescue because they didn't even know they needed rescuing. To them, reality was Anne's world. These strangers with guns and uniforms weren't saviors. They were invaders. The doors burst open. Officers flooded in. Orders shouted. 6 children were pulled out, screaming, fighting, clutching for the only life they'd ever known. For the police, it was liberation. For the children, it was chaos. Imagine believing your mother was the Messiah, only to see her kingdom torn apart in an instant. Home movies of sunny gardens and smiling faces collapsed under bruises, drugging, and years of abuse. The facade was shattered. The family's motto, unseen, unheard, unknown, was broken forever. But Anne herself? She was already gone. While police stormed Uptop, Anne Hamilton-Byrne and her husband Bill slipped across borders, hidden by forged papers and loyal followers. The nightmare had been exposed, but the villain was still free. For 6 years after the raid, Anne Hamilton-Byrne was a ghost. She and her husband Bill slipped from safe house to safe house, hidden by loyal followers, cushioned by millions, tucked away in overseas accounts. Then, in 1993, the chase finally ended. In a quiet home in upstate New York, the FBI stormed the property. Anne was arrested under Operation Forest, an international effort to drag her back to Australia. Headlines called it justice. Survivors braced for reckoning. For the first time, it seemed the woman who had stolen their childhoods would finally face the weight of her crimes. But the courtroom told a different story. Anne wasn't charged with torture, or child abuse, or drugging minors with LSD. None of it. Prosecutors narrowed their case to paperwork, illegal adoptions, false declarations, and even that slipped away. After years of silence, pain, and trauma, the verdict came down to a single count: a false declaration. The punishment? A fine of just $5,000. Survivors called it betrayal, first by Anne, then by the courts. The same drugs that once silenced them now shielded her in court, because trauma made their testimony unreliable. The very evidence of her crimes became her defense. And so, the woman who had drugged, beaten, and brainwashed children walked away, virtually untouched. The fall of the family didn't end its damage. For the children of Uptop, freedom was almost as disorienting as captivity. Imagine stepping into the outside world as a teenager and realizing you don't know how to live in it. Survivors describe not knowing how to buy food, how to choose clothes, how to speak to strangers without fear. Every decision felt impossible because choices had never been allowed before. One survivor said it simply: "We were living in a world we never grew up in." Some tried to rebuild. Sarah Hamilton-Byrne, the teenager whose defiance had shattered the silence, became a doctor. She devoted her life to helping others, maybe as a way to heal her own wounds. But trauma leaves shadows. Sarah died at just 46. Heart failure, doctors said. But many believe her body simply carried too much of what Anne had carved into it. Others fought quieter battles, broken relationships, addictions, years of therapy, just to stitch together fragments of identity. Even today, many survivors wrestle with questions most of us take for granted. Who am I? What do I believe? What does family even mean? And while they struggle to reclaim their lives, Anne Hamilton-Byrne lived in comfort. At her peak, she controlled an empire worth $50 million. In her final years, she drifted in a private nursing home, mind fogged by dementia, still surrounded by loyal followers. She died in 2019, never truly punished, never truly answering for what she had done. For the children of Uptop, there was no cathartic ending, no closing chapter where justice balanced the scales. There was only the slow, painful work of rebuilding lives from ruins. The story of the family isn't just about one woman. It's about what happens when silence wins. Anne Hamilton-Byrne didn't build her empire in the shadows. She built it in hospitals, in universities, in comfortable suburbs. She recruited doctors, lawyers, psychiatrists, the very people trusted to protect children. And for decades, silence protected her. The silence of children too terrified to speak. The silence of professionals too complicit to act. The silence of neighbors who thought the home videos looked normal. That motto, unseen, unheard, unknown, wasn't just the family's code. It was their weapon. And that raises a question no one wants to ask. How many other families, other groups, other monsters are thriving right now because silence still covers them? At its core, this story is about belonging. Every human being wants to belong. That hunger isn't weakness, it's universal. But in the wrong hands, it becomes a chain. So ask yourself, if someone promised you meaning, promised you family, promised you salvation, how would you know where the promise ends and the manipulation begins? That is the danger of silence. And that is why these stories have to be told. If this story shook you, if it made you see how easily trust can be weaponized, don't let it fade into the quiet. Break the silence. Talk about it. Share it. Keep these memories alive. And if you want to keep uncovering the hidden histories where psychology and power collide, subscribe. Because the best way to stop the next Anne Hamilton-Byrne is to understand the last one.